We wasted most of our history fighting over who's going to run churches.
I didn't know that I was an Australian till I got to Greece, so I was the foreigner.
A lot of us Greeks became educated because of Gough Whitlam. He educated our community.
Menzies needed workers. Menzies needed, you couldn't get any Anglo-Saxons.
Maybe their attitude was, you left and you got the better deal.
The traditional media, slowly and gradually, they're vanishing.
We have never finished the story of belonging.
Γεια σας and welcome back to Think Greek. I'm Kyriakos Gold and we're exploring Greek migration to Australia. Let's go to our guests. This is the period that we can actually hear ourselves on radio, see ourselves on TV, and later on connect to Greece over the internet. You were instrumental in some of that.
Yes, I think there was mention already about the important role the media have played over more than 100 years in shaping and influencing the community. I think as soon as the electronic media got into the play, the level of influence was elevated, and we started with private stations where individual Greeks managed to get an hour or two or three and speak in Greek and put Greek music and so on. But once the national media came into play and the community media, I think they not only took the traditional role of informing, entertaining, educating, they took the form of shaping and directing organisations and communities, because community organisations were fearful of alienating a particular Neos Cosmos or Panellinios Kyriakos or even SBS, radio for that matter, so they were very kind to them. I think history will record the important role of the media. We talked about the possibility of some of the media disappearing because of the inevitable assimilation or integration, but then they're still there. They still play a role. They're still dealing with the challenge of which language am I going to, publish or talk about to my community. And I'm not quite sure what we will see in 20 or 30 years' time, because we're talking about the Greek community almost as though it's a cohesive, well-defined entity. It's not. We are very different. We're a small minority, the people here, compared with the so-called Greek community. The Greek community, more than half are intermarried. More than half. What does that mean in 50 years' time? It is true that we have a very strong culture, a strong heritage and history that goes thousands of years, and we're distinct in our religion that emphasizes that sort of strength, which makes us dominate the other sort of stakeholders we deal with. So you talk to me about the media. I don't think the media will last forever.
Let's look at some examples. When did radio start? Was it in 50 years ago?
65.
65. And SBS 3EA?
70. TV?
The radio.
Radio 65 and 70 TV.
How did that change politics?
Well, I think George might have made a reference to it before. It enabled the voice of the Greek community to find a way, not just to a voice into the Greek community itself, but into the broader community. I also believe that the media itself meant that the Greek community was perceived by the political world as an entity to be reckoned with, and that sort of public voice, either through radio or TV, projected to broadly what Greeks were, and the Greeks were very vocal in a whole lot of areas. The union movement, I mean, it's no accident that our participation in politics in comparison to other communities is fairly high. And I've always felt that, and it may diminish because the next generation may not be as interested because it doesn't have to fight for very much. It has to find something else to fight for, and it may not be distinctly a Greek thing that it's fighting for. It might be fighting, as a lot are, for a broader global agenda. But radio and newspapers, I know from politicians, I can tell you, we take a keen interest in what non-English speaking media are saying and writing about us as political parties, and we make sure that we are present in their pages and on their airwaves because we view them as, you know, windows into the community, because there's also a very stereotypical attitude towards non-English speaking still communities by the what's left of the host culture, and that is that we all think alike, or that somehow if you found your way into the community either through a particular newspaper or a radio station or an individual president or secretary, then you can, you know, you can actually grab the entire community. But as Mike said, the community today in particular is not as homogenous. It's never been united really, because Greeks are recalcitrants, and we always have been and will continue to be. But the mixed marriages, I mean, both my kids' partners, one's from Japan, one's from Bangladesh. And that's what's fascinating about Australia, how it then leaps forward, you know, amalgamating and managing all of these inter-marriages, inter-relationships, what they produce, what the children look like, what their thoughts are going to be.
I want to stay with the evolution of media and what that meant for the community, because we moved from radio to SBS, then we have 3XY, which was a powerful voice for the community, and that was not a community station. It was almost commercial at times, you know. So then Channel 31, and now the internet, and media is evolving like this little show as well. This is media too. What are your views on how the evolution of media transformed community and the way white Australians see us?
Broadly speaking, in order for us to appreciate the historical evolution of, let's say, ethnic media, the Greek media in our case, we should be able to appreciate the role difference plays in the national imaginary of white Australia. Okay? For example, in the 1920s, in the 1930s, difference is excluded. Okay? Greeks and Italians and Maltese are insiders, outsiders. This is reflected in the media. Newspapers thought of their role not as simply conveying information, but creating a public image. That's what the media do. So they were consistently, with great discipline, over a long time, creating the image of the obedient foreigner. Okay? Out of fear, out of economic interest, a number of reasons. When difference becomes subversive in the 1950s and in the 1960s, we have a new, if you like, stage in the evolution of the Greek-Australian media. We have the Greek-Australian Review, we have Neos Kosmos, we have Nea Poria, we have Metanastis. I can think of a number of examples where difference is politicized in a subversive manner. Once this acquires political momentum, as Maria said, okay, the state and the broad Australian community decides that difference is an integral part of, let's say, Australia in the 1970s, okay, and immediately the task becomes how we integrate it. We move to multiculturalism, and in the era of multiculturalism, which was the result of the heroic resistance, it was a heroic phase of migrant resistance, becomes a state affair. And once it becomes a state affair, money comes in, and the state decides where the money goes. And we have a process of somehow civilizing difference, making this difference, depoliticizing difference, taking out the subversive element. And this is basically, if we look at multiculturalism as a long-term kind of process, this is the end result of the evolution of the media too. They play a role in politicizing the subversive difference. But this is part of the great story of a whiteness, which it excludes in the 1930s and 40s, and then it expands, and now it includes. The white story is still with us. The Greeks and other migrants challenged the white story. They tried to develop a coherent story about themselves, about belonging. They did that in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. In the 80s, it declines, and now we are in the post-multicultural era of amnesia. To go back to Coustas' point, we have never finished this story of belonging. And today, the Greek communities, I'm talking about, again, the organized Greek communities, not as individuals, are flooded by individuals and powers, religious and secular, that do not want the story to continue, in my opinion. They don't want questioning. They don't want to touch the hard issues inside the community and outside the community. Okay? And the end result of this is a depoliticization of Greekness. Greekness becomes purely a ritual, and we are very much interested in how we appear to the broader community. So our voice, if you like, is contaminated by this kind of anxiety.
We couldn't talk about the 90s without talking about Acropolis Now, Walks Out of Work, Effie, and who would be the best person to talk about that period? Mary Coustas.
There was a character in The Sullivans, which was a very popular television show set in wartime, and when they went to Crete, we saw beautiful Chantal Conturi was one of the characters in that. But that was it. Mostly they were shopkeepers and token and rare. There wasn't anything I saw on television that vaguely made me feel like I belonged there or I belonged in Australia, really. I mean, if they were Australian stories, where are our stories? That was odd to me because the streets didn't represent what I was seeing on the screens. I grew up in Collingwood for the first 9 years of my life, and it was very multicultural, and there was every flavour imaginable on the misère plate of multiculturalism there, and I felt very much, at home there. And then I was shipped to the white middle class, which was almost like what I was watching on television. And there was nowhere for me to fit and nothing for me to feel confident about because we weren't represented in any way. That was a hard thing to accept. Nevertheless, somehow I found the theatre and I fell in love with telling stories. And I went and studied as an actress for 3 years. But when I came out of my studies and I tried to get an agent, I was told I was limited, which was really weird considering I played children and dogs and men and all sorts of characters for those 3 years. And I think what the agent that I went to see to represent me meant was that I was physically limited, that there was no place in the industry for someone who looked like me. Luckily, I wasn't the only one that heard that message. Nick Giannopoulos, George Kapiniaris, Simon Palomares, the boys that I was able to do great work with, were being told the same thing. So we did what most Greeks did, and that was to become entrepreneurial and to start our own small business. And by accident, we stumbled across a big business. And suddenly, we were making impact and we were making change. And suddenly, by accident, we became commercial. And I think when you add up all the minorities, you end up becoming the majority. So we told our stories, revealed our characters, and found a place for ourselves on Australian television screens with our big show, Acropolis Now. We were able to give young ethnic children of many different races and backgrounds a reference point for the first time. And the characters were so playful with each other on Acropolis Now that we gave everyone language to recite after that. Effie came with her own lexicon of words like how embarrassment and hello good thanks and beauty it's a curse and I've got it. And she made no apologies for who she was. And she took on the boys. She was a very positive character out there that was larger than life, but we knew that the Greeks are always that. So she was based in a reality that we knew to be true as Greeks, and the boys did the same. And we made people that weren't of our backgrounds wish that they were. And that was very, very important to do at the time and since. And I wish there was more of that, even today.
I think what is important in exploring some of the issues tonight is the fact that we need to see, during this period of time that we're talking about, let's have a look at what happened to Greece. Complete transformation there as well. It did not remain the pure, 99% Greek Orthodox, Greek speaking. I look at the media on a daily basis and I'm surprised. I don't know whether we're in Greece or in some English speaking country. So things have developed there. We need to look at what we are examining historically, and more importantly, focus on what can we learn from all this in order for us to influence the future, the new generations that are going to replace us. What do we want for them? Or rather, what will they want from the community? And I think it's important for us to look at technology and how that has influenced everything we're discussing. I mean, in my view, the traditional media, slowly and gradually, they're vanishing. Citizen journalism is as important as ever, and it'll get more and more important. Individuals now produce media. Individuals inform one another about what's happening. Individuals inform one another about what is right and what is wrong. So why do we need SBS and even the ABC or look at the commercial? They're almost gone. Slowly and gradually, they will not have enough advertising to survive. So we need to look at the future, I think.
I will go back to the past though, because I'm still in the 70s, and Greece in the 70s has just finished up with a dictatorship. So it's a very different country. Greece in the 80s has a socialist government for the first time.
Which is a very reformist government, which makes a lot of changes legislatively, especially in relation to women, which then finds its way and impacts in the diaspora as well. That's right. Because that's important, because the diaspora has always tried to follow trends, and even more so in the 80s and 90s. And as we move into the internet world and online world, we're connected to the rest of the world. And so a lot of Greek Australians have greater access and immediate access to Greece itself, more so online than the generation that didn't and had to wait via a letter. I was in Greece just after the economic crisis, because that impacted profoundly on us as well here, because the diaspora felt it also and was connected to it. You might remember at the time, Manolis Glezos was still alive, and I attended a parliamentary meeting where he came to address us. And at that time, Tsipras was Prime Minister, and the President of the Hellenic Parliament, the Speaker, was Zoe Konstantopoulou, right? So she's in this room with Manolis Glezos, who addresses a large number of politicians from around the world, not just Australia, of Greek background. So it's the World Hellenic Interparliamentary Assembly. And he was promoting the idea that Greece's economic problems would be solved if the diaspora Greeks everywhere made an economic or financial contribution. So you'll remember that was a very simple, sort of simplistic way of raising the remittance of the $1 and $2 that my parents used to put in the envelopes to decades later. And he actually said to us, our problems would be solved, and he more or less implied that the diaspora had a responsibility. I took offence to that because I grew up with my dad. My late father resented the fact that he had to leave Greece, and I'm sure many of his generation did. So they had to carry that burden as well, that they had to go, and so the sacrifice they made was for the others who stayed. So I asked him, what would you say to my father, who left Greece so that Greece could get its act together and the rest could prosper? What do you say to that person, and how do you explain your failure? I mean, why didn't you succeed? Why didn't you succeed? And now you ask for that that bailout. Because to me, that was it. That was fundamental. Well, he didn't quite, I don't think he quite understood where I was coming from, but Zoe did. She did. She knew exactly what I was saying. And she got up and she, of course, went through the history, the political turbulence and of Greece, and blamed it on the corruption of the political Greek system. And that's why they weren't able to succeed. But that's always fascinated me, that sort of reason for leaving behind your home and your family and having to become someone else, somewhere else. And in the end, for many people, it was, the promise that they would be better off didn't eventuate.
Is that sense of entitlement a Greek thing?
I don't know whether it's a Greek thing or whether, again, it's a human condition of, family responsibility to those who were left behind in poverty, and certainly the Greeks, and I'm sure other communities. I mean, Pacific Islanders do the same thing. They come and work in Australia for remittance back home. And, that's not a bad thing. For me, that moment symbolised a great disrespect by the Greek state for the Greek migrants who had to leave, and a failure to appreciate and understand what that cost them, and whatever success they had, they didn't owe the Greek state anything. Now, I'm not suggesting the entire Greek state thought that way, but this was a serious proposition that was being promoted at that time.
The reason I'm asking it in that way is because more often than not, when we hear family stories of people going back, they have similar discussions with their family. So it's not, I don't find it weird that a politician thought the same thing that a cousin or a brother or a sister or a sibethera would ask. So it sounds like very much a Greek thing in my mind.
Well, maybe a Greek thing insofar as Greece did export a large number of its people to the benefit of other countries, and therefore in that sense maybe they felt that, a sense of entitlement from whatever prosperity those migrants may have encountered, that they owed them.
We have to understand our history, and the history is, again, as I repeat, we are migrating people, and without the diaspora, there wouldn't be a 1821 revolution, let's be honest. The Φιλική Εταιρεία was orchestrated in Odessa, the Maggios Korais was in Paris, Rigas Fereos was in Europe, in Vienna and the rest of Europe, with the flame in regards to the recognition and who we are as a people. So, and it goes on, I could go on this one. The Olympic Games of 1896 was bankrolled from the Greeks from overseas. You've got the Avero family who were from the area where Dean comes from, Voria Epiros, for example. I mean, Greece is consistently, we had 60,000 Greeks from America who went and enrolled to the army for the First Balkan War. They left the ships from Boston, from New York. 60,000 Greek Americans.
My grandfather was one of them.
Yeah, they went on a ship to join the Greek army for the Macedonian Revolution, for the Apelευθέρωση της Μακεδονίας. So they've always expected that from the diaspora, and I think that's one thing maybe where Glezos, who, let's be honest, he was a hero at the time of what he did in 1940. The reality is that this expectation of simply populist theory of just, give me $1 and everyone can give me $1, we'll make the money, and we're back to that problem.
I want more representation. I want all the flavours of what it is to be Greek and, ethnic and European to be out there regularly. There are multiple voices that, I can't represent everyone and everything. And I wish that there were more. And I expected there to be more. And it took a long time, too long, I think, for that to impact. There were great, creatives like Anna Kokkinos and Alex Dimitriadis and Chris Tsolkas that were saying important things that needed to be said and providing, other stories and other dilemmas that were being faced by Greeks. But I wanted more, because I know how addicted I am to the Greeks. I can't collect enough of them, and I want the country to have those collections available to them too. I wanted those stories, those dilemmas, those characters, those journeys to be placed somewhere public.
The journey never ends. Stay with us for more Think Greek next week.
As individuals, we are telling our stories.
But here in Australia, we have other people resisting.
They've gone to Mykonos and they've gone to major clubs in Mykonos and they're playing Greek music.
You lived in a certain suburb, you had more in common than you did with your own people somewhere else.